Wasio was an ugly old virgin who wasted his good years raising monsters. However, his miserable life changed when the monsters transformed into freaky baddies who would do anything to have him as their sugar daddy. It all began in the middle of a vast sea on a small sandy island, where, on a shore, a small octopus inquired about what snow was. Our middle-aged protagonist's teacher, Wasio, explained that water must be generated and condensed simultaneously to achieve snow. As soon as he answered the question, the octopus raised her hands and revealed her deepest desire, saying she would love to transform into a human when she's grown. The octopus went on to explain that when she finally became a human, all she would love to do was develop some massive plot with her teacher, Wasio. Hearing this, Wasio was stunned, wondering how his ugly face was raising up monsters instead of chicks. Noticing his surprised expression, the octopus assumed Wasio hated her because of her cringy appearance. But then, Wasio gently took hold of her face and said it wasn't true, reassuring her there was no shame in having hopeful dreams. 10 years passed, and the scene transitioned to an academy in the middle of the city. Inside the academy, we find two ugly-ass girls complaining about how stressful the day had been and the need to rush home to cool off. As they headed home, one of them accidentally bumped into an old, senile man who looked like he was suffering from an addiction. Frightened, the girls started to sweat, and they bolted as fast as their legs could carry them, shouting that the old man smelled worse than rotten fish. Old man Wasio then sniffed his underarms, puzzled as to why the girls had called him a smelling pig. After all, he had taken a bath that morning and was wearing freshly washed clothes. However, he ignored the mean girls and began walking to the teacher's staff room. That was when he noticed something odd: a pretty chick with 2 separate countries on her chest carrying a piece of luggage. Startled, he approached the mummy milker and asked if it was her first time in the academy. The girl immediately stared at him like she had just seen a ghost and then surprisingly embraced his skinny body. Wasio almost froze to death because the weight of her giant plot cannons were crushing his body. He wondered if it was a prank because, come on, a random chick would never hug an old, disgusting man out of nowhere. However, he noticed they were creating a scene at that moment, and the students were already calling him an old, cultured creep. So, he pushed the crazy girl away from his body slightly. The confused girl then asked for directions to the head teacher's office, saying she had forgotten to bring her map. So, Wasio gave her directions to the teacher's office, but advised that next time, she could find the map of the academy in her identification book. Hearing this, she searched for her identification book in her luggage, but still couldn't find it. Noticing how sad the girl was for not finding the book, Wasio knelt before her and said people tend to make hasty decisions when they act rashly. He touched her head and told her not to be sad because mistakes happen. Upon hearing the advice, the girl's eyes glistened with gratitude, and she thanked him for being so caring. Holding her head, she muttered to herself to keep calm and avoid making unnecessary mistakes. Wasio said exactly and informed her that this technique was called wisdom from the past. Wasio told her that back when he was an office clerk, he had always applied this technique when he faced difficult problems. He said he had one particular time when he accidentally deleted his data presentation. The girl stared at him awkwardly and asked if an office clerk was some kind of delicious food she could eat. Hearing this, Wasio knew the girl must have escaped the asylum, so he quickly bid her farewell and left. As he continued his never-ending journey to the teacher's office, Mrs. Bouncy Plot stared at Wasio in confusion, wondering why the old man had not recognized her. Sometime later, Wasio finally arrived at the teacher's office. That moment, a fellow elf teacher named Limnoa shoved a questionnaire containing intermediate magic questions to his face and asked him to make corrections where needed. Wasio stared at the dude, wondering why his worthless couldn't do it himself. So, Wasio told him he would be busy cleaning the residence. However, as Limnoa began to walk away, he told Wasio that his filthy excuse wasn't good enough. Limnoa added that the job was perfect for a smelling underachiever like Wasio, unlike him, who had won tournaments for the academy with his club, bringing pride not only to the director but the entire school. However, Wasio told him that even after bagging trophies for the school, he could never bag a chick. Several hours later, after teaching all day, Wasio walked home hungry and exhausted. He stared inside a local bar, longing to have a bottle of beer. But that was when he remembered he was still a useless brokey who couldn't afford any beer. Nothing had changed. Upon entering his residence, he ran into the old housekeeper, who gave him some leftover dinner. The old nosy hag also advised him to get himself a wife who would cook delicious meals for him, so there would always be food anytime he returned from work. However, Wasio told the old vegetable to mind her business and concentrate on finding herself a man who would service her old rusty engine instead. Following that, Wasio stepped into his filthy shack, which reeked worse than a sewer, sat on his rickety bed, and ate the leftovers given to him. Afterwards, our protagonist took a shower, and it was during that moment of solitude that he reflected on his miserable life. 10 years ago, Wasio had just been a hopeless office worker with no plans of getting ahead. He had no girlfriend or wife, just like every loser watching this video. Suddenly, as he returned home late from work one night, he unexpectedly teleported to this strange world. In this world, he was hailed as a hero, but after failing to prevent its destruction, his only success was saving a single spider. However, even after saving the spider, it was taken from him by a mad Frankenstein, who went on to experiment on the spider before his very eyes. In this world, Wasio couldn't even have a single moment of peaceful sleep because he kept having terrible nightmares. So, after this terrible failure, Wasio decided to be a teacher at the academy. Back in the present, as he walked to his balcony, he pondered on how, even till now, he was still an old bachelor who hadn't achieved anything, and his neutered eggplant had not even clapped any chick. However, he was only able to perform little magic spells here and there. Smoking a cigarette, he thought about his students 10 years ago, his little octopus, and other animals that somehow managed to put a smile on his face back then. The following morning, Wasio arrived at the academy feeling refreshed after showering the night before. However, on seeing him, Limnoa asked why he still reeked like an unflushed toilet, which made Wasio start sniffing his disgusting body to confirm. Changing the subject entirely, Limnoa informed him that a monster girl would be joining the academy that day. But Wasio had absolutely no idea of what she meant by monster girls. Hearing this, Limnoa wondered what disgusting hole the old-smelling creep must have crawled out from. However, he explained that gene mutations of various monsters created monster girls. He further explained that these girls possessed superior intelligence, exceptional physical abilities, and beautiful appearance, surpassing that of young human girls. After this brief lecture, Limnoa turned and said Wasio should be aware of all these since he was a professor of biology, which made Wasio blush in embarrassment. Limnoa then pointed out that thanks to the talents of these monster girls, the government and high-ranking officials had promised to fund the academy. After saying that, Limnoa leaned toward Wasio and mentioned that one of the monster girls that had joined the academy was approaching the door at that moment. Just then, the mummy milker from earlier stepped into the class, and that instant, the director, who looked like a rat literally, welcomed her officially into the academy. The monster girl then introduced herself to the class as Claudia, from the kraken species, and all the students were mesmerized by the gigantic assets on her chest. The director, however, then assured Claudia that during the week, a teacher would be assigned to her. But Claudia told the short ugly that she had already decided who would be her teacher. After saying that, she moved toward Wasio and said, "Long time no see." Without hesitation, she unleashed her octopus tentacles, wrapped him with them, and then asked if he still hadn't recognized her. At first, Wasio didn't understand what the girl was talking about. Still, when he stared deeper, he instantly noticed the similarities between her and his little octopus student from 10 years earlier. With that, Claudia smiled and said for the second time, "Long time no see." As she placed her hand on his, Wasio instantly recalled that it was the same way the little octopus had placed her tentacles on his hand the very day he had saved her years ago. That instant, Claudia smiled and told Wasio that she was his little octopus who had surprisingly transformed into a monster girl. The next day, Wasio, running late, rushed to the academy, looking like the most useless loser in the world. Suddenly, he heard someone call his name from behind, so he turned only to realize it was Mrs. Melontopus. Just then, she offered to give him a ride to the academy since he was late. However, Wasio was stunned when he didn't spot any bents nearby. Before he could react, Claudia grabbed his hand with her tentacles and dashed toward the academy, leaving Wasio flailing helplessly in the air like a fly. Minutes later, they arrived at the academy. So, Wasio thanked Claudia for the express transport, saying this was the first time he had arrived early to school that month. In response, Claudia assured him that from then on, she would make it her duty to bring him to school every day. Those words deeply moved Wasio as he struggled to grasp the reality that the tiny creature he had once saved had grown so much. While they talked, the rest of the students found their teacher-student relationship very inappropriate. At the same time, Limnoa was dying of jealousy that Claudia had chosen Wasio, a rank E professor, to be her teacher instead of a rank A professor like him. But Claudia warned the jealous, unloved idiot not to call her Professor Daddy, a lowly rank E professor. Wasio, however, asked Claudia how the 3 days she had spent in the academy had been so far. Claudia replied, saying class had been fun, but the class she enjoyed the most was his biology class because it excited her in ways she couldn't explain. Wasio then handed her a form to fill out her chosen career path. He told her that as a monster girl, she had a promising future ahead of her and could even rise to the position of a high-ranking officer if she desired. Clenching her fist, Claudia remarked that she had always suspected that was why they brought her to the academy. She added that her suspicions were confirmed when her classmates, eager to gain favor, kept begging her to recommend them to the king's department. She also added that the teachers had also mentioned something similar earlier on. According to the teachers, she had big potential to be a member of the king's affair, but with such a heavy expectation on her shoulders, she doubted if she would be able to fulfill it. Hearing her concerns, Wasio told her that he was not in the perfect condition to advise anyone and was unsure if he was the teacher she needed. Upon hearing this, Claudia's eyes welled up with tears as she told him he was the teacher she had always wanted. However, Wasio simply walked away, casually advising her to take it easy, leaving Claudia emotionally overwhelmed. Shortly afterwards, in the cafeteria, Wasio headed to the counter to get his usual order. Suddenly, Claudia popped out of nowhere with her tentacles around his hand and commented on how little the food he ordered was. She told him that not eating well was bad for his health, but Wasio told her he had no choice but to eat like a beggar since he was broke. After that, Claudia showed Wasio her career choice form and said she had filled it out. Just then, Limnoa arrived, snatched the form, and glared with a stormy expression. His voice filled with anger as he declared that no monster girl could ever become a teacher. Limnoa remarked that Claudia shouldn't even consider being a teacher because she was exceptionally talented. He added that there was no way she could choose an ordinary profession, but advised she to aspire to a higher profession like the king officer. Wasio interrupted, telling Limnoa to respect the student's decision of profession. Upon hearing this, Limnoa lost it, telling Wasio to shut his filthy mouth and saying Claudia being a teacher was a great loss to the entire world. Limnoa immediately grabbed onto his Wasio's tie, telling him that, as teachers, they couldn't stand and watch that happen. Limnoa pointed out that as the only a rank teacher in the academy, he should be the one in charge of the monster girl, and not his talentless virgin. While still grabbing hold of the tie, Limnoa instructed Claudia to apply for a change of teacher immediately and submit the request to the director that same day. However, at that moment, Limnoa felt something caressing her face like the Grim Reaper was licking her face, scaring the of her. It turned out to be Claudia's tentacles, and as Limnoa turned, Claudia loudly warned him to leave Wasio alone. Claudia pointed out that Wasio had always supported her dreams and was the best teacher in the world. Putting a finger over her mouth, Claudia revealed that when she hated herself for being worthless, Wasio had advised her to know herself. Angrily, Limnoa remarked that those words, "know thyself," made no sense. But Claudia told him that his face being that ugly made no sense. Insert meme, that one was a violation. At that moment, Wasio instantly had a flashback of years ago when Claudia was just his little octopus and was eager to transform into a girl so she could clap him. But he lifted her to the sky and encouraged her to know herself. He had advised her never to envy others but to always look for the good within her and perfect it. He told her that if she wanted to become human, she had his support, but it should be for herself and not for anyone. Back in the present, Wasio was shocked that after so many years, such a simple sentence like "know yourself" could have helped her fulfill her dreams of evolving into a monster girl. That instant, Wasio and Claudia embraced each other, and Claudia pointed out that Wasio was the only person in the world who could be her teacher. Hearing those words infuriated Limnoa. He immediately began to cry like a spoiled brat, while saying it would even be better if it was the former Wasio, not this old waste of space that was before her eyes. However, Claudia told him that even if Wasio reeked worse than expired milk at the moment, he shouldn't be written off like some piece of trash. Hearing those words, Limnoa clenched her fist and began to cry even more, shocking everyone with how written off his face was. Limnoa immediately screamed, promising Wasio and Claudia they would regret making a fool of him. As the loser left, Claudia completely ignored him and asked Wasio if they could get lunch. So, she grabbed Wasio's hands, which made him emotional as he thought how the little octopus he had taught now wanted to become a teacher. He remembered Claudia mentioning how "know yourself" helped her. At that moment, Wasio had never thought those words would return to him 20 years later. He was proud to be a teacher because of reasons like this. The next day in biology class, Wasio used Claudia as a case study to explain how the monster girls could use poison and were experts at handling powerful magic. He warned the students that these monster girls possessed inhuman strength and, despite their cute appearances, were far stronger than the Incredible Hulk. At the end of the class, Wasio apologized to Claudia for using her as a case study for his terrible lesson, but Claudia reassured him that she was happy to help. She moved towards him and mentioned that as long as she got to be with her sugar daddy, she was the happiest girl in the world. After that, she helped him clean the chalkboard using her long tentacles. Noticing this, Wasio commented that he didn't know she could stretch her tentacles so far. Claudia explained that her tentacles were very useful because they could stretch and shrink at her will, but they were not as powerful as the long tentacle between his legs. After letting out those words, she grabbed Wasio by the neck using her tentacles and revealed that her tentacles could also give deep massages. While stretching out his twiggy back like dough, Claudia informed Wasio that she used to work as a masseur after they got separated years back. She then stared Wasio in the eyes and told him she could give him another kind of deep massage that would sharpen the old bone of his dead sword. Without wasting a second, Claudia began to move her tentacle up his thigh, almost giving the old MC a seizure. After giving his lifeless rod some few strokes, the bad chick smiled and asked him if he was nervous. She told him she had to practice her charm, and then asked if he had enjoyed every bit of her deep massage. Nervously, Wasio informed her that the next class was about to start. Although Claudia expressed her desire to spend more time with him, she had no choice but to leave the class, mentioning that she was heading off for lunch. As she left, Wasio collapsed his head on the desk and felt a kind of relief because the bad chick almost collapsed the walls of his fragile heart. Meanwhile, outside the academy, a carriage arrived, and a baddie wearing a hat stepped out. She muttered to herself that she wondered if her teacher, Wasio, would still remember her. Shortly afterwards, Wasio stepped out of the academy excited that he was getting the rest of the day off, a privilege that only happened once a year. As he walked home in happiness, the chick wearing a hat from earlier suddenly hugged him from behind. Startled, Wasio fell to the ground, stared at the chick, and demanded to know who the nutcase was. The girl said she had never expected to have changed so much that he couldn't recognize her. She then lifted her gown, revealing her spider legs, and introduced herself as the spider he had once saved, now evolved into a monster girl. Hearing this, Wasio's jaw dropped so far in shock that it nearly hit the ground. In the next scene, Wasio took the spider girl to the cheapest bar in town. Upon entering the bar, Spidey girl was thrilled, and she mentioned that it was her first time in such a classless bar. She looked to the ceiling and told Wasio that she had never seen a chandelier so scrappy, it could double as a retirement home for spiders. As she sat down, Madame Webb complained about how dusty the seat was, which infuriated out of the bar owner. The vexed owner then walked up to Wasio, telling him he was only considerate with the whole insults because it was the first time Wasio had brought such a fine chick to his bar. While they ate, the monster girl took a bite of the steak and closed her eyes as she enjoyed every bite of the tasty meat. She then commented on how dry and tasty the meat was. However, then and there, Wasio had gotten enough of her rude remarks, so he called her little spider and then asked if she could stop insulting the restaurant. The spider girl pointed out that she was just giving her honest opinion of how the place was. Moreover, she was no longer his little spider, but was now a baddie named Aria. Upon hearing this, Wasio immediately had a flashback of when Aria was just a shy spider that would hide in the corner of the classroom. Aria mentioned that those were hard times for her, but she could pull through thanks to his encouraging words. But Wasio had no idea of how his words had encouraged her. Aria then asked if he was still a teacher, so Wasio replied, telling her he was now a biology teacher, leaving Aria shocked. Wasio explained that the times had changed, so he had no option but to change with it. After saying that, Wasio told her that the small octopus in their class back then had also managed to become a monster girl and his student. However, he pointed out that his relationship with Claudia was weird because she was always glued to him. He thought that since she had changed so much physically, she would have also changed her clingy habits since she wasn't a child. Just then, Aria ordered the bar owner to bring his most expensive drink and food, zapping Wasio's brain like a lightning bolt because he was more broke than a church rat. Several hours later, after eating, they stepped outside. Aria then informed Wasio that she had to go because her carriage had arrived, and seeing her carriage, Wasio immediately assumed the girl must be loaded. Aria then embraced him, saying she really hoped she would get to see him again, and was glad she got to see him, causing Wasio to blush. They wished each other good night, and the carriage drove off. Inside the carriage, Aria was thrilled with excitement about getting to see Wasio again. She smiled because she had finally achieved her life goal of hugging her teacher with human hands. However, she immediately became gloomy when she recalled Wasio talking about Claudia being a monster girl also, and became super jealous. But suddenly, she glanced at a package sitting beside her and remembered she was supposed to give Wasio the packaged box. In the meantime, back at the academy, Claudia just finished one of her classes and quickly rushed to the biology class to meet her broke sugar daddy. However, she was horrified when she heard that Wasio had left with some beautiful chick with long dark hair. On the other hand, Aria returned to where she had left Wasio to give him the package but realized he was gone. As a result, she wondered if she could go to the academy the next day to give him the package. Suddenly, her eyes widened in shock as she witnessed something horrible before her. It turned out that a church had been engulfed by fire, and the citizens were trying all they could to extinguish the fire with water, but their efforts were useless. At that moment, a nun in the church shouted that a child was still inside the burning church. Curious, Aria approached the nun, who explained that the kids in the church were playing with candles, hence the fire. Seeing the sadness in the face of the nun, Aria decided to be of help. Instantly, she charged towards the burning building. Getting inside the church, Aria was engulfed by a suffocating haze of thick, choking smoke. With that, she knew she had to hurry and save the child. To do that, she would need to use water magic, even though she was a bit rusty. Determined, she began to move inside the burning church in search of the trapped kid. That was when she heard the boy cough, and as she turned, she found him lying unconscious under the rubble. So, she immediately picked up the boy and began to move outside. But suddenly, a burning wood crashed down, blocking her path. Aria then thought about using her lightning magic, but since her magic was a bit rusty, she was scared she might destroy everything, making the issue even worse and causing more injuries to the child. This dire situation triggered memories for Aria as she remembered in the past how exceptional Wasio water magic was, even better than waterbenders. Wasio was practically the highest-ranking magician in the kingdom, and was popularly called the Golden Eagle. But unfortunately, he went from being the greatest magician to being the greatest and most useless biology teacher after suffering a shoulder injury. Suddenly, the citizens outside the church were amazed when they noticed that the entire building had been engulfed with water and tiny fishes were floating in it. A little girl noticed the fish in the water and then moved to get one. But that was when Aria emerged out of the water carrying the unconscious child on her back. She brought the unconscious boy to the nun, leaving the citizens both shocked and speechless. She then informed the nun that she had performed healing magic on the boy, but the doctor could also check him. The nun was grateful and thanked Aria for her heroic effort, while the crowd praised her for being beautiful and super strong. That instant, Aria sighted Wasio leaving the scene in the distance. She then called out to him, and as he turned, Wasio signaled her to take care of the crowd on his behalf. Aria immediately struggled to get to him, but the star-struck crowd overwhelmed her. Just then, the water engulfing the church began to recede. Sitting beside the church, the little girl watched intently as the water receded, hoping she could still catch a single fish for dinner. After waiting a while, the little girl approached Aria, asking if the fish was made from magic. Aria replied, saying that the fish was actually made from magic, scaring the out of the girl. After saying that, Aria noticed the wreath of flowers the girl wore on her head like a crown. The girl revealed that while she was sad about the destruction of the church, a man who possessed magic made a wreath of flowers for her and told her everything would be fine. With a smile, the little girl said she loved magic because it brought happiness to people. Hearing those words, Aria immediately had a flashback of when Wasio had once placed a wreath of flowers on her abdomen when she was still a spider. Back then, she inquired why Wasio loved to give her flowers. Pointing his finger with delight, Wasio pointed out that the secret of living was giving. He went on to lecture her about the importance of giving and how when a person gave, it made them happy and the recipient happy. He told her that giving to others brought meaning to life, which was why he became a teacher. Remembering all this, Aria felt a sense of pride that Wasio was her teacher, because even now that he was entirely worthless, he still managed to find a way to give to others. The following day at school, the news of the church that got burnt at the center of the town and how Aria put out the fire was buzzing everywhere. Claudia, on the other hand, was worried about the rumors spreading, but Aria, who somehow made it to the academy, assured her that it was Wasio who had put out the fire. Claudia responded, telling her she thought as much because she had always known Aria's magic abilities were as useless as flat chests. Wasio approached the girls, asking if they were yapping about the past. Seeing him, Aria bowed her head, thanking him for the second time for his help transforming her into a monster girl. She then offered him a gift box and said living was giving just like he had taught her. Without wasting time, Wasio unwrapped the gift box, and his eyes nearly popped out in surprise. The gift was a tie, so Aria removed the old Fred Flintstone tie he had always worn and replaced it with the new tie with spiderwebs embroidered. Wearing the tie, Wasio smiled in delight because he felt like a complete gentleman for the first time in his life. Sometime later, Aria arrived at the teacher's office to meet Wasio. She then handed him her future career form and informed him of her decision to join the Magic Guard. Wasio smiled warmly and assured her he would do everything he could to support her chosen career path. Moved by his encouragement, Aria leaned in and hugged him tightly. While sitting alone in the office, Wasio thought about his girls and how he would have to do everything possible to help them achieve their goals in the future. Just then, he overheard two random students arguing seriously about whose faction would win the upcoming spring battle. He thought Limnoa's group would most likely win the faction battle since they'd been undefeated for 5 years. However, that wasn't his concern. Meanwhile, sitting on the fountain outside the school, Claudia was shocked that Aria, who had always been getting angry and biting others back then, wanted to join the Magic Guard to help others now. Aria replied, saying she bit others because Claudia had a freaking habit of bringing worms to class, and she was always disgusted. Aria then asked Claudia about her plans for the future. Claudia responded by telling her she wanted to become a teacher just like Wasio because she liked the idea of humans and monsters studying together. Just then, 3 ugly goons, led by a femboy with a Karen haircut, swaggered over and asked the girls to join their faction. Claudia and Aria stared in confusion at what the idiots were yapping about. The femboy then introduced himself as Frederick, a second-year student and a core member of the Limnoa faction. Frederick and his lackeys then informed the girls that their faction was a type of magic study group concerned primarily with studying magic invocation. Hearing this, the girls were confused about whether to join, while the Karen haircut dude continued to persuade them to join, saying it would be fun. He even promised to make them 1,000 times stronger and help them shine brighter. Even so, Claudia declined to join their moronic group and told him to go find a lake to drown himself. Aria also declined, saying she hated gatherings and, even worse, the gatherings of dumbasses. Angered by those words, Frederick challenged the girls to a duel, saying the winner was the first to hit the other with magic. Claudia tried telling him to give up already, but the guy was far gone in his determination to prove he was an alpha male. He immediately cast a spell summoning a wave of water, and before he could blast the girls with it, Claudia turned and neutralized it effortlessly. Seeing this, Frederick smiled and said he was just testing their powers. But Claudia said he should have tested if his dead brain was intact instead. With that, Frederick said he would have to motivate them a little bit, and in the blink of an eye, the guy summoned a ferocious werewolf. He explained that the werewolf represented his magical power, which would manifest naturally according to the rank of his magical ability. Frederick revealed that the manifestation of the magical power was known as the image of magic power. After saying that, he smugly asked if the girls were impressed and pointed out that according to Limnoa's teachings, the creatures they manifest are a reflection of the user's spirit. These representations could be in the form of a beast or magical creatures. However, the larger the size of this representation, the stronger the user's magical abilities. The power of the user could be known just by looking at their invocations. Looking at Frederick's invocation, the rest of the students were awestruck at the strength and size of his werewolf. However, Aria and Claudia were hardly impressed and concluded that judging by the size of his invocation, his magic abilities should be a rank C or rank B. With a smile, Frederick warned them not to jump to conclusions just yet. Without wasting a minute, the guy went ahead to summon a giant ice knife from the firmaments of the heavens that almost impaled the girls but shattered the ground. With that, he smiled and asked the girls if they were now impressed. Touching his hair smugly like Prince Charming, he told the girls that his spell reciting was perfect, and that was what made his magic remarkable, like an A-rank magician. He assured the girls that Limnoa, the supervisor of their faction, could triple their powers just by reciting spells. With that, he stretched his hands like he was about to propose marriage and then asked the girls to join his faction. The girls stared at his arrogant, ugly face and were clearly disappointed. They began to compare his werewolf invocation to the ripped monster Gigachad Wasio could invoke on a good day. So, in conclusion, Claudia told him to go piss himself and said they would rather stick with Wasio to the end. Upon hearing this, Frederick placed his hand on his chin and said he never expected them to choose the old, boring teacher over him. This statement pissed the hell out of the girls. However, the douche went on to say that even though they owed the old loser a favor, that shouldn't be enough reason to choose him. Frederick added that according to what Limnoa told him, she and the dirt graduated the same year. While she became an A-rank magician, Wasio remained a lowly E-rank. As soon as he let out those words, a magical blast immediately destroyed the tower behind him. It turned out that Claudia had fired an energy blast at him that accidentally hit the tower, and then she instantly unleashed her powerful tentacles, asking how dare he make fun of Wasio. Seeing this, the rest of the students were scared for their lives, while Aria advised Claudia to learn how to control her anger. After saying that, Aria unleashed her massive, powerful spider legs and summoned a giant skull-faced monster, towering over them menacingly as she demanded that Frederick apologize immediately. Seeing this overwhelming sight, Frederick's eyes widened in sheer terror, and he immediately wet his pants in utter panic. On the other hand, the monster girls continued to demand that he apologized for the insults he had rained on their daddy. However, Frederick was still amazed at the sight before his very eyes, so Aria yelled at him to apologize quickly. Meanwhile, the rest of the students were still stunned that the school's library was destroyed by just a single attack from the monster girls. Suddenly, Limnoa and Wasio rushed to the scene, demanding to know what had caused the massive explosion. Staring at where the library used to be, the teachers realized the library tower had been reduced to shambles. Annoyed, Limnoa demanded to know who the student responsible for such a disaster was. That moment, Claudia pointed a finger at Frederick, saying the Buffin had started it first. Meanwhile, out of nowhere, Frederick dropped to his knees, grabbed Claudia's hand, and, with wide, desperate eyes, declared his love for her, leaving everyone utterly stunned. He mentioned that it was the first time he had seen such explosive magic, and he found her an incredible creature. Still holding on to her hand, Frederick pointed out that even though Claudia was putting on a limiting ring on her finger that prevented her from releasing her full power, she still managed to unleash such a powerful attack. Blushing hard, the hopeless simp said he had never felt such an intense feeling before and suspected it must be love. He dropped a bombshell, asking Claudia to be his wife, but the girl was horrified to hear those words. She immediately yanked her hand away from his, declaring with a sharp tone that she would never marry someone with such a horrible face. At the same time, Limnoa smirked and remarked to Wasio that he was clearly doing a job as the one in charge of the girls, letting things escalate to the point where they destroyed the library tower. Embarrassed, Wasio told her the girls must have had a good reason for destroying the tower. However, he promised to be stricter with them from then on. Placing her hand on his shoulder, Limnoa told him that if it was too much of a job to care for the monster girls, he would be more than happy to take care of them on his behalf. However, Wasio began to leave with the girls and told his worthless to take care of his bad breath instead. Later that day, at the counselor's office, Frederick handed an apology note to Wasio stating that he had initially provoked the girls. He remarked that he had reflected on his actions and realized that his actions were reckless. However, he proudly boasted that Limnoa was in charge of him and would cover the cost of destroying the tower. After saying that, he turned to Claudia, grabbing her chin and declaring that he would surely get her and free her from the brainwashing she had received from the dirty old man, hinting at Wasio. But Claudia angrily told him to go hang himself. With that, he turned to Aria and said he had never been attracted to girls that looked like men. However, he stretched his hands, saying he would be considerate, and then asked her to join his faction. Pissed, Aria told him she was irritated by his presence and would send him to his grave as a living sacrifice if he continued to pester her. As Frederick left the room, Wasio casually remarked that the young man was obviously deeply in love. However, this statement pissed the girls off, but he tried explaining that since they were of the same age, they would make a good couple, unlike an old man like him. Suddenly, Claudia's supersized melons were all up in his face. Standing over him, Claudia angrily said she hated that he didn't care how much his words hurt her, and then told him they would definitely have a date after the end of his class. A few minutes later, Wasio scolded the girls, warning them not to use magic outside of the class, and they were remorseful about their reckless actions. Standing up from the chair, Claudia pointed out that she was heading to her afternoon class and reminded Wasio of their date, making the old man blush redder than a tomato. After class that day, in the female dorm, Claudia tried on a couple of dresses for her date with Wasio, and was complimented by two random girls that she looked very cute. Before long, Wasio arrived at the girls' room to take them on the date, and was first welcomed by Claudia's XXL melons that left him frozen in shock. However, he complimented Claudia on how cute she looked. Just then, Aria appeared and demanded a compliment from him, so Wasio smiled and told both girls that they looked beautiful. Meanwhile, the random nosy girls began gossiping about Wasio, calling him a useless E-rank teacher who couldn't handle his role as the girls' instructor. Their whispers didn't go unnoticed, as both Aria and Claudia overheard every word. Shortly after, while on the date, Claudia offered to hand-feed Wasio some sweets. Still, he politely declined, saying he was already full. Suddenly an old, bald, drunk fart stumbled over to Wasio, placing his hands on his shoulders, and then asked what he was up to. Seeing the girls, the old drunk smiled, saying it was cute that Wasio was having fun with his students. The old baldy then told Wasio that, now that he had such cute students, he should aim for a promotion instead of settling for his current level E rank. The old man then asked if Wasio wasn't depressed with the fact that Limnoa was now of a higher rank than him. While Wasio and the old man discussed, the girls sat nearby, overhearing the entire conversation. At the same time, with a smile on his face, Wasio assured the old, nosy fart that being an E-rank teacher with little responsibilities suited him just fine. Wasio added that he would have been eager for a promotion if he was younger. Hearing all this, the girls were greatly concerned that everyone underestimated Wasio, not only Frederick and Limnoa, but the entire townspeople. So Claudia mentioned that she had an idea, and Aria immediately followed up, claiming that she had one too. So, while the old pot-belly continued insisting that Wasio focus on getting a promotion, the girls began to excuse themselves. They told Wasio they had an urgent matter to attend to and promised to reschedule the date for another time, leaving him confused. Later that evening, while eating at the cafeteria, Wasio noticed that the girls didn't have dinner, and he couldn't see their presence in the cafeteria. Suddenly, Aria approached him, holding a piece of paper, and asked him to sign it. Wasio demanded to know what it was. Aria revealed that it was a document to establish his faction, the Wasio faction, to show everyone just how amazing he was. Banging his head on the desk, Wasio informed Aria that there was a problem. He revealed that he wasn't allowed to have his own faction as an E-rank teacher in the academy. However, Aria schooled the clueless oldie on the requirements of creating a faction. She explained to him that, according to the director, the faction had to be established using the raising ring as the core method of magic. She added that they would also need at least 3 students for the faction, and Claudia was already managing the student enrollment process. Lastly, she told him that he would need to be a D-rank teacher, and starting from that moment on, he had already been promoted by the director. Placing his hand on his cheek, Wasio wondered why, for over 20 years, the hobbit of a director had suddenly decided to promote him to a D-rank teacher. Aria mentioned that she had threatened to leave the academy if the faction wasn't created, so the director had no option but to oblige. With everything settled, she asked Wasio to hurry and sign the document. Still, Wasio encouraged her to join an existing faction instead of creating a new one. He advised her to interact more with other students and learn magic instead of worrying about a sick old man like him. Wasio even added that she could join the Limnoa faction since Frederick had enthusiastically invited her from the get-go. Hearing this, Aria's expression changed immediately from cute to an "I'm gonna bite your head off" kind of face. Seeing this expression, Wasio nearly entered nirvana. On the other hand, Aria remarked that Wasio was amazing both as a teacher and a magician. However, she suddenly burst into tears, lamenting that he constantly frustrated her efforts. So, Wasio immediately apologized and said he would sign the document immediately. As he moved to sign, Claudia burst into the scene, shouting his name and handing him a letter from the landlord. Reading the letter, Wasio discovered he was being evicted from his shack because the old hag had transferred the property to her son. According to his new landlord, Wasio's filthy existence was no longer wanted on the premises. Placing his hand over his head, Wasio thought deeply about his predicament, knowing that from the next day, he wouldn't only be a broke, he would also be a homeless hobo as well. That moment, Claudia bowed to him and pleaded that he accepted the offer of creating a faction so he would at least get a dorm in the academy to sleep. With no choice whatsoever, Wasio signed the document to be the supervisor of the newly created faction. Meanwhile, elsewhere, in a high-rise tower, a pretty chick was lying unconscious inside a cryogenic chamber. Back to the MC, after signing the document, he and the girls headed to the director's office for the final approval. However, the Smeagol denied their proposal to create a new faction. Instantly, Claudia became furious and demanded to know why their proposal was being denied. With a look of total shock, they were informed that the raising ring method of magic already existed. According to how things were, the Limnoa faction used the vocal summoning method of magic. The Julius faction used summoning with rings, while the Alba faction used magic with incense. Feeling disappointed, Wasio and the girls left the director's office while Wasio pondered deeply, searching for another solution. He knew he had to find another way to create a new faction so he could get a dorm, or else he would be thrown out to the street like homeless scum. That moment, he thought of begging the new landlord to let him stay. Suddenly, the ever-annoying made a dramatic entrance, shamelessly calling Claudia honey, much to the disgust of the girls. He immediately grabbed Claudia by the waist, asking for a kiss, but she shoved his ugly face to the side. Turning to Wasio, Frederick announced that he had a message for him from Limnoa. Frederick then informed Wasio that the library tower Claudia had destroyed earlier contained a magic reactor that belonged to the Limnoa faction and that it had been destroyed in the process as well. So, since his students' recklessness destroyed the tower and reactor, Limnoa had instructed Wasio to head to the ghost tower to retrieve a new reactor. Frederick also mentioned that the ghost tower was crawling with real ghosts, scaring out of Claudia. On the other hand, Aria showed no fear whatsoever, excited to embark on the adventure. But Wasio was already sweating out all his body fluid from intense fright. Shortly afterwards, the team finally arrived at the ghost tower with Wasio sweating bullets and gripping tightly to a pillar, scared as hell. Upon entering the tower, he instructed the girls to move quickly and retrieve the reactor so they could leave as soon as possible. At the same time, somewhere inside the ghost tower, Shiny Shitstain reported to Limnoa that he had delivered the message to the old vulture and the monster girls. Limnoa then thanked him for his useless efforts. So, he inquired if, once the plan succeeded, Claudia, his self-proclaimed babe, would finally join their faction. Limnoa then assured him that if the plan to scare the old, filthy man with the ghost successfully worked, and she dramatically saved the girls like a true ghostbuster, then the monster girls would have no choice but to see how useless Wasio was. They'd be freed from the old donkey's brainwashing and, with no other option, would have to join their faction. Making a low-budget illuminating symbol with their hands, Limnoa and Frederick proudly stated the principles of their faction, using intelligence to get what they wanted and, ultimately, to amass wealth. Laughing like true villains, they eagerly awaited the arrival of the monster girls. With a confident smirk, Limnoa was certain that she would soon be in charge of the girls, and everything would finally return to how it was meant to be from the beginning. Entering deep inside the ghost tower, the girls were frightened, so they clung tightly to Wasio's hands. Suddenly, they noticed a door moved slightly with a creak that almost gave them a heart attack. Out of nowhere, a gluey image of a ghost appeared, giving them the greatest scare of their miserable lives. So, without waiting for approval, Wasio and Claudia ran faster than their shadows, leaving Spidey Girl behind. While running, they accidentally dropped inside a trapdoor and fell faster than the pull of gravity. Aria tried saving them with her spider web, but she was just so useless. So, Wasio and Claudia smashed to the ground harder than I smashed your mom last night. Just then, Claudia decided it was the perfect opportunity to develop some massive plot with Wasio's old wood. Licking her tongue like a freak, she began to strip, exposing her cleavage. Wasio begged for her to calm down, but she pressed her super-sized melons hard against his chest and then moved to lip-clap him for starters. However, at that moment, the 18+ rated scene was disrupted by a bright light that emanated from the cryogenic pill. Smashing the computer angrily, suddenly, Wasio sighted the capsule housing an android girl with zero magic power, and to make matters worse, it was set to explode in just 60 seconds. Frightened, Wasio informed Mrs. Plot that they needed to leave immediately. With the timer counting down, Claudia pointed out that leaving would be impossible because they were trapped inside. They immediately tried opening the locked door, but their efforts were as worthless as Wasio's face. Suddenly, a voice blared from the capsule, announcing that self-destruct would be activated in 60 seconds. With the timer still counting down, Wasio's 2 brain cells finally clicked, and he moved to read the capsule's instructional manual. Just then, his eyes widened in utter disbelief when he discovered a magic book. He frantically flipped through the book, searching for any clue to deactivate the self-destruct. But at first, he couldn't wrap his head around the strange and convoluted language the manual was written in. Finally, he was able to read a portion of it. So with the timer at 46, Wasio approached the capsule like a true protagonist. He placed his hand on the capsule and silently cast a spell, instantly summoning his ripped, monster-headed invocation in a burst of raw power. Instantly, a whirlwind filled the place, and a mighty surge of electricity emanated from the capsule, and suddenly the timer stopped. Overjoyed, Claudia couldn't contain her excitement, showering Wasio with praise as she called him her amazing master, and repeatedly referred to him by his old nickname, the Golden Eagle. Pointing at the magic book, she asked what was written inside. Opening the book's pages, Wasio revealed that it was an ancient artifact containing many lost spells. With that, Claudia suggested they use the book as the study object in case the Wasio faction was finally approved. Suddenly, the android Aurora woke from her many years of deep slumber and opened the capsule, leaving Wasio and Claudia in shock. The machine girl immediately began asking for her master, but Wasio told her he had no idea about the master she had mentioned. However, the girl apologized for sleeping so long and said she was ready to resume the master's research. So, Wasio then showed her the magic book, and the girl said her master had written the book. With sadness, the mecha chick mentioned that she was too weak to keep using magic and that since her master had gone to the great beyond, she would want Wasio to add new pages to the book. Staring at the paper with sorrowful eyes, she pointed out that it was her master's mission. After saying that, she began to return inside the capsule. However, before she entered the capsule, she thanked Wasio and Claudia for showing her the paper one last time and then informed them that she would unlock the door so they could leave. Lying inside the capsule, the chick stated that if her master was no more, then there was no reason for her to exist, and it was best she returned to sleep until her master returned. With that, Wasio turned to leave, but Claudia stopped him, pleading for him to become the android girl's new master. She told him he was a remarkable magician, but Wasio immediately stopped her, saying he couldn't because he was just some poor biology teacher. Watching him leave, Claudia asked if he was really going to leave the girl behind. Upon hearing those words, Wasio's mind flashed back to what he had read in the magic book. The book revealed that it was one of the 7 ancient artifacts, and its former master had written that the Aurora robot was the book's guardian. For generations, the book had been entrusted to those deemed capable, individuals known as the administrators. Back in the past, it was revealed that the former master couldn't continue with the project due to low magical powers. Even though it was a very tough decision, she was forced to abandon the humanoid and pass the magic book to the next master. However, Wasio wasn't ready to take on such a huge responsibility and would rather remain a worthless biology teacher. On the other hand, Claudia was greatly worried and was strongly against leaving the Alexa 2.0 with Sass behind. She turned back, stared at the Robobee, and then insisted that Wasio join her in his harem. Looking at her, Wasio remarked that he had enough crazy chicks in his harem already and didn't need more. However, Claudia grabbed his hand and said she had no idea what might have happened to him since they parted ways for him to be so cold-hearted. But she believed he was still the kind man who loved helping others. On hearing those words, Wasio started thinking with all his brain and then told Claudia that one day he would definitely tell her the reasons behind his cold-heartedness. After saying that, Wasio returned to the capsule, gazed at the bot girl, and then declared that she had a heart and surely deserved a master. Holding her hand, Claudia asked him to give her a name. So, as the robot opened her eyes, Wasio named her Alice and invited her to leave with him. That moment, Alice stared at Wasio in surprise. So, Wasio informed her that her name onwards was Alice, and he was now her new master. Excited, Claudia immediately grabbed Wasio's hand and said he was their new daddy. With that, Alice remarked that she would update her system, making Wasio her new master. Before long, Wasio returned to the academy with his new unlocked Robochick. He then recounted everything that had happened at the ghost tower to Limnoa. Hearing all that had happened, Limnoa's jaw nearly dropped to the floor as she thought that instead of returning with a new magic reactor, the old man had returned with a new girl. However, she tried acting cool, saying that as a Ranka professor, she had always known the magic book was down at the ghost tower and that the automaton was also there, ignoring her like an annoying pest. Claudia asked the principal if they could make the magic book the research subject for Wasio's faction. The principal then asked if Wasio could handle the faction. Wasio responded by pointing at his girls and saying that he could handle the faction with the help of his exceptional students. However, Alice, being the sassy robot, corrected him, saying she was not his student and then gave him the peace sign. So, with that, the rat principal approved the formation of the Wasio's faction and informed the members that their new residence would be the ghost tower. Hearing this, the team was dejected, but Aria assured them that while they left her behind earlier, she chatted with the resident ghost, and she turned out to be a friendly ghost, just like Casper. Moving on, Wasio asked the girls to shop for some clothes for Alice before bidding them farewell, explaining that he would be occupied with the paperwork for the ghost tower repairs. So the girls went shopping for clothes for Alice, while Wasio handled the repairs of the destroyed ghost tower. After the shopping, the girls joined Wasio at the site of repair with Alice now dressed in a maid outfit. Alice mentioned that she had picked the most suitable outfit to serve Wasio well as her new master. The girls then asked Wasio if Alice was looking hot, and Wasio couldn't help but agree, which made Alice blush. Claudia and Aria immediately called her out on her blushing, but Alice denied it immediately, saying robots didn't have the capacity to blush. On the other hand, Wasio instructed the girls to move away from the site for the ongoing construction, but the girls insisted on helping with the repairs. Staring at the cemented blocks, Alice activated the laser blaster from her hand, explaining that she had anticipated a falling rock. She then pulverized the incoming rock to smithereens before it could cause any lethal damage. She then mentioned that she had eliminated the threat while everyone was frozen in shock at what they had just witnessed. After that, Alice grabbed Wasio by the face, asking if he was fine. Wasio smiled because he could see how affectionate the android girl had become towards him. Arriving home later that day, Wasio met his old landlady, who reminded him that he was no longer a tenant on her property and then asked him to take his ugly face from her sight. Sad and depressed with nowhere to go, the girls suggested Wasio stayed at an inn till the tower's repairs were completed. However, Wasio reminded them he was still a broke church rat who couldn't afford a dime to pay for a room. With that, Claudia suggested he stay in her room since he had no friends to stay with. Before Wasio could decline, Aria chimed in, demanding he stay in her room instead and promised to indulge him in all the plot styles in the world. Still, Wasio declined, saying it was inappropriate for a teacher to stay in a student's room. Grabbing him by the waist, Claudia asked if he was refusing because he was nervous something bad would happen. She then remarked that they could sleep on the same bed and do all sorts of unimaginable things, leaving Wasio's brain totally fried. Even so, Wasio screamed at her to stop filling his head with cultured thoughts. But these girls were on a mission to cream his sausage by all means. Aria also leaned close, saying she wouldn't mind if his massive old wood destroyed her floodgates. At that moment, Wasio had gotten enough. He told the girls he was popular and had friends who would be more than happy to have him at their crib. So, hours later, they approached Limnoa, who refused at the spot to accommodate Wasio's dirt and his shank. Wasio pleaded with him to reconsider for the sake of their old classmate bond. But Limnoa declined, stating that even though they were classmates, they were completely in different ranks. Pointing at him, Limnoa reminded Wasio that he was a rank A teacher while Wasio was a rank E teacher, and just being in the same space with him would reduce his stees by 1,000,000. Wasio then asked if he could stay at the teacher's lounge, so Limnoa replied with a smirk, telling him that he could lend him his balcony. Just as he let out those words, the girls immediately began moving Wasio's king-size bed into the balcony. But that instant, Limnoa shouted that he was joking and never thought Wasio would actually move in. At the same time, Aria said she would never allow Wasio to stay on a balcony. At that point, Claudia remarked that the only option left was for Wasio to choose which girls' rooms he would stay in. Despite this, Wasio firmly told them he would never consider staying in their rooms. Just then, Alice raised her copper hands, startling everyone. Soon after, Wasio moved into the tower under repairs and settled in with Alice in her underground chamber, where her capsule was kept. Later that night, Wasio bid Alice good night, and as he slept on the bed, she slept on her capsule. While sleeping, Wasio had a terrible nightmare and was sweating profusely. Noticing this, Alice decided to place his head on her flat motherboards. Soon, Wasio woke up to find himself in such a sus position, so he screamed, asking what was going on. Alice replied, telling him that he was having a nightmare, so she decided that hugging him would help calm him down. Wasio told her he was fine now, and she could let go. But Alice insisted on torturing him with her flat plots even more. However, Wasio pointed out that she was freaking strong, and he couldn't even move his head. Nevertheless, Alice continued to wrap his head in her embrace, telling him everything was fine. Closing his eyes, Wasio pondered that even though the girl was flatter than a washboard, her embrace was indeed warm. He thought about how it had been ages since he'd been hugged. Even his mother had disliked hugging him because of his disgusting smell. But with Alice's embrace, he felt a sense of relief and could finally sleep peacefully for the first time in a very long while. Suddenly, Claudia and Aria appeared, and every part of their bodies was shocked to see Alice and Wasio cuddling like lovers. Just then, Alice woke from her slumber, so the girls asked her if they were done developing plot or were just about to commence. Suddenly, Wasio woke as well, and the girls couldn't contain their anger to yell at him, saying they were disappointed in him for refusing their fleshy plots to clap hard, flat copper. However, Wasio asked them to chill, saying Alice was just an automaton and had no plot to develop. Alice chimed in, agreeing with Wasio by stating that she wasn't human and was merely an automaton. However, to everyone's shock, she added, rather unexpectedly, that even though she was an automaton, she had ripe peaches waiting to be harvested. The following day at school, Claudia and Alice kept following Wasio everywhere and insisted on grabbing lunch with him. The rest of the students watched in surprise at how close Wasio was with the girls, but then noticed that Aria was lagging, looking pretty upset. Later that day in class, while the teacher taught, Aria pondered ways to get Wasio to notice her as he did Alice and Claudia. She wondered what she could do to capture his heart, and just then, she recalled Claudia's infamous fashion sense, a shirt and tie with her cleavage boldly exposed. So, she felt Wasio was more attracted to such a fashion style and then decided to give the outfit style a shot. So later that day, in Wasio's office, he was frustrated because he wasn't progressing in translating the magic book. Placing his head on his desk, he thought of asking the school's linguistic professor for help. Suddenly, Aria entered his office dressed like Claudia, with her melons pointing north. She approached Wasio's desk, bending down in a sus manner in an attempt to reveal her cleavage, and then asked what he was working on. Seeing Aria's seductive dressing, Wasio almost had a nervous breakdown. He asked if something was wrong with her because she was acting differently from her normal self, but Aria insisted she was good and that nothing was wrong. However, still staring at her pointy melons frighteningly, he told her he was working on deciphering the magic book. But in his head, he could tell Aria was acting very strangely because Aria was not speaking in her usual form or dressed in her normal fashion. Staring at him seductively, Aria asked Wasio if he was hot, and before getting an answer, she began to adjust her tie, exposing more of her cleavage. But at that moment, she noticed that instead of arousing the old man and charging his Excalibur, she was actually making him confused. She wondered what she was doing wrong, especially since she had dressed just like Claudia. So, in a desperate attempt, she suffocated him in her pillows, asking him not to overwork but to rest on her chest. In her mind, she tried imitating Alice since that was what Alice had done earlier. Wasio tried telling her he was almost entering the great beyond. But that was when they suddenly noticed that the magic book's pages were flipping and also emanating very bright light. Later, Claudia and Alice entered Wasio's office to hand him some books he had requested. But surprisingly, they noticed that he was not in his office. As they began to ponder where he could be, they immediately sensed he was inside the magic book with Aria facing a dangerous test. Inside the magic book, Wasio and Aria were faced with the blinding light that scared the of them as they wondered where they were. From amidst the bright light, a voice announced that they would be assessed to know if they were worthy of mastering the 4 stellar spells, and if they failed, they would definitely lose their lives. That instant, they both passed out, and when they finally regained consciousness, they found themselves in a city with very thick fog. Wasio asked Aria if she was okay, and she said she was fine. With that, he suggested they quickly finish up with the weird test so they could go back to their world. Placing his hand over his head, Wasio mentioned that he didn't want to miss the magical presentation at the faction meeting. Suddenly, Aria noticed an eerie figure approaching and alerted Wasio of its presence. It turned out to be a skeleton-like apparition wielding an axe. Shocked, Wasio tried defending Aria like a top G, but he lost every shred of confidence when the monsters from both sides attacked him. Aria removed her magic limiting ring and blasted these monsters with a powerful electric bolt, completely obliterating them. Seeing this attack, Wasio laughed and said he would leave the test to her since it seemed she could handle the monsters. With that, Aria went ahead to fry other approaching misty monsters with her electric bolt, instantly eliminating them. Moving on, as they ventured deeper into the world, Aria realized this was the perfect opportunity to play Adam and Eve with Wasio since they were all alone in the world. She knew with the other girl's absence, this was the opportunity she had always been searching for and was determined to develop plot with Wasio. So, she told Wasio she was tired of walking and would love for him to carry her. Shocked to oblivion, Wasio demanded what was happening because the Spidey girl had been acting weird lately. he asked if something was going on or if her pent-up hormones were disturbing her. In response, Aria told him she was fine, and all she ever wanted was for him to look at her the same way he did Octomummy and Robot Girl. Suddenly, a giant monster appeared behind Aria, about to send the thirsty girl to meet her ancestors. Still, Aria was more concerned about making a speech as she told Wasio that she wanted to make his hard old wood even harder than Claudia did. However, at that moment, the monster landed a strike, so Wasio immediately grabbed Aria's hand and pushed her out of the incoming attack. He then asked if she was okay, but Aria was already blushing so hard because she was so close to him. Suddenly, Wasio noticed the monster preparing for a second attack. Frightened, he urged them to run, but the monster struck again before they could. Reacting instinctively, Wasio lunged at Aria, diving to push her out of harm's way. He then apologized for pinning her on the ground and asked if she was fine. However, staring at him, Aria felt all kinds of ways she couldn't express with words. She then grabbed his neck, pulled him close, and then revealed that her heart was racing very fast. Wasio demanded to know if she was talking about Formula 1 kind of racing. However, he explained that they had to deal with the monster before chatting about racing hearts. That instant, Aria couldn't resist asking how Wasio truly saw her. Still frightened of the monster attacks, Wasio pointed out that it wasn't the best time to have such chats, and they needed to deal with the intruding monster first. With that, Aria removed her magic limiting ring and created an impenetrable barrier so they could have some privacy without any interference. While inside the barrier, Wasio told her she was elegant, kind, and the best at magic in her classroom. He told her that she had her unique charm, just like Claudia and Alice, and each was beautiful in their own way. Wasio went on to inform her that she didn't need to mimic anyone to appear beautiful, not even Kim Kardashian. He revealed that according to a famous saying, roses were beautiful, and so were sunflowers and peonies, but they were all beautiful in their own way, just like women. Upon hearing all this, Aria's eyes widened in enlightenment. However, placing his hand on his chin, Wasio said he might have mixed up the saying and didn't say it as concisely as he should. But smiling shyly, Aria told him that his lack of conciseness was a major part of his irresistible riz. After saying that, she adjusted her tie, rolled up her sleeves, and thanked Wasio for returning her to her senses. She admitted that she had her unique charm and didn't need to mimic anyone else. Accomplishing his mission, Wasio smiled and said even though he loved seeing her in short skirts, he would prefer things go back to how they used to be. With the issue settled, Aria disintegrated the barrier and then turned to the monster, pulverizing the out of the annoying beast. After defeating the monster, Aria quickly carried Wasio and began to sprint with her giant spider legs. As she bolted, she explained that it was better to use her mobility instead of taking down the monsters one after the other. On the other hand, staring up at her and being carried like a Disney princess, Wasio was totally embarrassed. When Aria looked down, smiling at him, he immediately became flustered because he could tell the girl was deeply in love with him. Soon afterwards, they arrived at a giant door engraved with an Illuminati symbol. Pushing the door, Aria realized the door didn't budge and then wondered if some kind of magic was preventing the door from opening. However, Wasio touched the door and loudly screamed, "Open sesame." Since nothing happened, Aria concluded the man was simply too old and dumb. But suddenly, the giant door opened, surprising both of them. Stepping inside, they found an orb glowing with a bright, blinding light. As they approached the glowing orb, Wasio tried touching it, but suddenly, a white-haired girl with a snake on her head appeared behind him and ordered him to stop. Shocked, Wasio tried protecting Aria and then asked the creepy girl who she was and what she wanted with them. The girl explained that she was the guardian of the magical orb and then said that if Wasio wanted the magic of the orb, then he would have to defeat them. The Medusa ripoff warned Wasio that he couldn't touch things without permission. However, holding her head, the girl exclaimed that she was tired of the and just couldn't continue. But the snake on her head warned her to be strong and speak up like a true guardian. After saying that, the snake turned to Wasio and immediately scolded him for attempting to touch things without permission. Noticing that, Aria burst into laughter at their pathetic attempt at playing the villain. Seeing that, the snake then turned to Medusa and said they were being looked down upon and that it was time to show their true power. Without hesitation, Medusa swerved the long hair covering her face to the side, and then suddenly, her face started to shine brighter than the sun. Looking at her face, Aria immediately turned to stone. Shocked, Wasio demanded to know what had happened to Aria, and Medusa explained that Aria was not dead yet, but she had turned her to stone so they could discuss it in private. She told Wasio that if he wanted the orb's magic, then he would need to accept her terms. Only then would Aria's petrification be lifted, and he would get the magic he so desired. Holding Aria's shoulders, Wasio asked Medusa what her terms were. Medusa revealed that she wanted Aria's feelings for him, which shocked Wasio. Looking at Aria, Wasio couldn't believe she had feelings for him. He thought there was absolutely no way the reaction he had been getting from her was from a place of love. Still, he inquired what would happen if he gave Medusa Aria's love for him. Medusa replied, telling him that she would break the spell and that Aria would return to normal. Still confused about what this crazy girl was talking about, the snake jumped in, saying he was a big fan of love. It explained that it fed on emotions, and then love from an innocent crush from youngins tasted better than beefsteak. The psychotic snake also mentioned that it also loved the thrill a cultured loser got from reading steamy magazines while yanking his cord at night. However, Wasio had a different opinion and told the snake that the feeling of love was nothing but a joke. The snake, however, replied, calling Wasio a dumb didn't know that younger girls these days often had a crush on older guys. After saying that, the snake asked Wasio how he actually felt for Aria. Wasio replied, saying even if Aria had the slightest feeling for him, it should just be a youthful fling and nothing serious. He added that in the long run, she would realize it was just a fleeting obsession when she finally met the right young man. The snake responded, saying indeed, but for the main time, the deal would be for him to enjoy the so-called fleeting infatuation, and then he could leave with the magic. Shortly afterwards, the faction exchange meeting's research presentation began, with Limnoa delivering a remarkable conclusion to her presentation that left the students thoroughly impressed. Just then, Wasio rushed in when it was announced that it was the turn of his faction. Despite the students' low expectations for a faction led by a useless rank E teacher, Wasio surprised everyone by presenting the magic book, revealing his faction had been researching lost ancient magic, leaving the students in awe. After that, Wasio led the students outside the building, where the girls were already waiting for him beside a massive magical circle meticulously drawn on the ground. Seeing the gigantic circle, the students were stunned. However, Wasio explained that the magic circle would be used to attract dark magic, and that it also served as a barrier to contain the dark powers. Wasio said he would show them his faction search result, the 4-star meteor magic. He immediately summoned a giant, freaking ripped monster with horns and then unleashed a meteor shower into the atmosphere. Suddenly, the dark magic circle portal opened, and then the evil dragon, Capivara, was resurrected. The evil dragon immediately attacked the students, so Wasio tried sending it back into the dark portal but failed. So, he attacked it with the meteor shower and instantly eliminated it. Seeing this, Limnoa was amazed that Wasio obliterated the evil dragon with just a single attack. On the other hand, Wasio tried explaining to the students that it wasn't supposed to go that way. However, Limnoa immediately announced to the students that Wasio was only a rank E teacher and that his failure was anticipated. With that, all the students returned to the building, leaving Wasio and the girls behind. Watching them leave, the girls were pissed at Limnoa for insulting their presentation. On the other hand, Aria inquired about what had happened during the test, admitting that she couldn't remember anything. Wasio turned and mentioned that he also couldn't remember all the details. Meanwhile, spying on them behind a tree was Medusa, who was concerned about Wasio properly handling the meteor shower magic. Hours before the presentation, Wasio had declined to give Aria's love to Medusa and her snake back in the magic world. He explained that even though it was just a fleeting obsession, it was an important part of who she was, and taking it away for the sake of magic just didn't feel right. With that, Wasio said he would be giving up on the magic. Back in the present, the snake told Medusa that even though the magic spell was very powerful, he did the right thing by handing it over to someone who was indeed kind, and Wasio was the right person to handle the meteor shower just fine. Sometime later that day, the Academy held a faction network buffet party for the students of each faction. While the students were enjoying themselves, an ugly fatso was busy stuffing his face whole with meat. Seeing him, a random student said he was eating like a glutton even though his useless faction didn't present anything. That moment, Limnoa and Frederick entered the ballroom looking like the starboys of the occasion dressed in their favorite tuxedos. Meanwhile, a group of students noticed the absence of Wasio's faction and wished they could see the monster girls. However, in the blink of an eye, Aria and Claudia arrived at the party looking like million-dollar babies. Seeing them, the simp boys couldn't stop staring, and even Frederick dropped his glass of champagne. On the other hand, Claudia tasted the beef served at the party and felt like she was in heaven. While eating, she accidentally dropped the sauce on her massive chesticles. So, she asked Wasio to use his meat to clean it off. However, Wasio told her she was no longer a child, so she could wipe it herself. But Alice helped wipe it off without even being asked. Staring at Claudia, Frederick approached her and started saying some useless, cringy pickup lines. However, Claudia ditched his ugly face at that moment, bolting out of the ballroom faster than Flash. At the same time, Alice brought a nice meal for Wasio, so he collected the food and thanked her. However, Wasio suddenly realized that everyone at the party was staring at him and gossiping about his weird habit of unlocking monster girls like they were Pokemon in his Poke deck. Just then, Aria approached Wasio, asking him if he had noticed anything unusual about her appearance. But before Wasio could say anything, Alice pointed out that Aria's melons had reduced by 10 centimeters. Bringing out 8 pads, Aria told Wasio that she thought he liked busty girls, so she had initially added some padding to her melons, but now she was taking them off because she had decided to be herself. Upon hearing this, Alice said she would have her melons enlarged since Wasio liked chicks with supersized melons. But Wasio told her not to bother because her chest was hard steel and could never be modified. After saying that, Wasio moved away from the crowd to the balcony to smoke cigarettes. From the balcony, he viewed the girls having fun interacting with other students and was a proud daddy. Suddenly, he heard a voice behind him asking what he was doing outside, away from all the fun. It turned out to be Medusa and her snake head. Wasio replied, saying he was fine, just watching the girls from a distance, and Medusa chimed in, completing his statement by saying he was alone because he was a loner and crowded places made him anxious like he would throw up. After that, Medusa asked about Alice, his female robot. Wasio responded, telling her Alice was all good. Grabbing his hand, Medusa told Wasio that, as guardians, they were very gullible and could be easily manipulated by people with ill intentions, which could lead to serious trouble. However, she said she was sure Wasio would care for Alice and make her happy. But at that moment, Wasio was already a statue. Just then, Aria and Alice walked onto the balcony and saw that their master had been petrified. Alice undid what had been done. At the same time, Claudia stormed in to meet the group and said the simp boys of the academy had been chasing her everywhere to get a taste of her cookie because it hits different. Also, Frederick burst into the scene, and upon seeing Medusa, the latest member of the Wasio harem, he felt disgusted because he wasn't a fan of snakes. Meanwhile, Limnoa observed the monster girls having fun with Wasio on the balcony. Suddenly, a black-haired douche approached her and said he could sense Limnoa hadn't yet given up on being the teacher of the monster girls. With a mischievous smirk, the black-haired guy asked if Limnoa wanted his help to finally become the monster girls' teacher. Will the black-haired dude benefit Limnoa? And how would Medusa being a part of Wasio harem change the plot of this story? Comment Monster Girls if you're eager to find out in our part 2. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content like this. As always, thanks for watching.